Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? Welcome everyone to our second webinar of our webinar series. This one will be about curriculum mapping. So a little bit of housekeeping before I turn it over to our presenters today, which is Dr. Sarah Vera and Dr. Tom Smalling. This meeting is being recorded, so we will post both the recording and the slides after this webinar to morerts.com under the resources. And then we do ask that if you have any questions during the meeting, go ahead and drop those in the chat. And then once we are done with the presentation portion, we will go through and answer those questions for you. So, Sarah, take it away.
Actually, I'm going to let Tom take it away. He's going to go
Okay.
first. Yeah, he's going to go first.
Wait, what? No, I'm
But
just
I
kidding.
get surprised.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Today, we'll be discussing curriculum mapping and how it connects the standards to student success. This webinar series is a collaborative effort between COARC and NBRC. I'm Tom Smalling, Chief Executive Officer for COARC. I'll be doing the first part of the presentation, and then I will hand the baton over to Dr. Sarah Vera. Next slide. These are our objectives for today's session. There is flexibility. I want to reiterate, you'll hear that from Dr. Vera later. Programs can adapt based on their own structure, their own needs. Number of you may already have curriculum maps that you're using, but we just want to emphasize that there's no one right way to do the curriculum mapping. We'll move from, I'll talk about definition with a focus on the COARC standards, the brand new ones, to application. These objectives build intentionally from a foundation to applied learning. I just want to also say, and Sarah will probably say the same thing, we could probably spend how much time talking about all these things that we're going to cover. And I just want to mention that COARC does have plans to do more of these types of presentations that focus on the standards, more collaborative efforts with the NBRC, more helpful documentations. After this is over, sometime this afternoon, I'm going to send Shelley Christensen the green light to send out the standards. So you will get to see it in its entirety, the interpretive guidelines, the standards, and the evidence of compliance, and there'll be a little email note. So keep an eye out for that. Our focus today is just on a couple of sections, and we hope you can get something out of this. First, again, we're going to define curriculum. We're going to then describe the standards that are relevant. And we're going to explain the process for aligning that map to the outcomes, and with the focus on the NBRC exam content, which is something you all, if you've been a key personnel for at least a few years now, you've probably encountered the content matrix comparison from the last exam, which is on our website. If you have not done that, you will be very familiar with it by the end of this year. And finally, I'm going to hand Sarah's got the fun part. So that's illustrating what a curriculum map actually looks like. So we're going to have some application part of this. Next slide. So what is curriculum mapping? Well, curriculum mapping connects all parts of your program. It aligns all your courses, the learning activities, and the assessments with the expected competencies. Focus here is on the expected competencies. It identifies gaps. You'll see in the presentation that we'll mention gaps, but there's also the other part of gaps which is redundancies. Okay, we all have operated for many years in little faculty silos. You have your courses, I have my courses, and we never really spent much time looking at what others are doing. So there are gaps, and we have some tools to look at that, which we'll talk about. But there's also redundancies. Hey, I didn't even know I was covering this, and you're covering this. So, we all want to look at time management when it comes to what we're teaching, because certainly there's plenty of time for all of you to teach everything you're supposed to learn, right? So again, this will help you focus specifically on what is needed to be taught based on a number of things, which we'll talk about in a minute. Again, when I taught years ago, I took over for another instructor. My first course was pulmonary function testing, and I looked at what they taught. I modified it as I saw fit. And then that was it. I started teaching. Trial and error, right? That's how we all did it. But there was no intention. There was no identifying, hey, the first thing I asked was not, hey, what are the expected competencies for this program? Are we sharing this? Do I know what the other classes are doing? That is all changing. There's a major revision to these standards, and that major revision is focused most on sections 3 and 4, which again we'll give you an overview on. But things have changed over the years, and COARC has made that big push to making things that you do intentional and not haphazard. There has to be a linkage between all of them, an alignment and an integration. And that's really the curriculum map is just one of those tools. Yeah. Next. So the purpose of the curriculum map, again, like most maps, it organizes into didactic, lab, simulation. Now you're going to see that term used a lot more because the COARC standards now have a lot more about simulation. It is not an adjunct to anymore. It is a necessary and an integral part of the standards. So you will see that mentioned a number of times when you get to see the standards. So lab, simulation, clinical environments, didactic. All those need to be integrated and organized. That's what a map does. It documents where content is introduced, developed, and mastered. Okay. It aligns courses with competencies and outcomes. Competencies at the very beginning, your outcomes are your output. Okay. It's going to align all of that. And it also documents how learning is assessed. Because what point when you start evaluating the curriculum and reviewing and making revisions, because a map supports continuous improvement, is not just identifying what the outcome deficiencies are, but what caused those outcome deficiencies and what are you going to do about it? Half the problem, half the solution is really identifying the problem in the first place and what's causing it. So we'll touch base on that. Next slide. So what about the new standards? Thankfully, maybe for you, all the sections are all generally the same, 5 sections, and the focus really is sections 3 and 4 for this presentation. So the COARC standards, the curriculum mapping is driven by the COARC standards. Okay, that's a given. That's one of the rules we have. Standard 3, which as you see right here, 3.01, and really 3.02. 3.01 is the primary goal, because now we identify primary goal and optional goals. The primary goal of every program is to produce graduates that enter into the practice, professional practice, and can earn the RRT. Okay? So that's your primary goal. That's the starting point. That's your building block. That's the very first Lego piece you put on, and then you build from there. So standard 3 .01 is your primary goal, and then you have optional goals. You'll see in the new standards, there will be mention of degree-specific goals. That's the first time we're talking about that. So those with baccalaureate and graduate entry into practice programs will be identifying additional degree-specific goals. Those have to be integrated in addition. And then you have optional goals that may be mission specific or what your advisory committee wants you to focus on. All those goals have to be in play. I just want to reiterate, it is not just standard 3.01. It's not the end all and be all. There are other goals that you will likely be identifying. Section 3 also has the assessment part. Okay. And that's first, and again, assessment is how you're going to evaluate those competencies and how you are going to reevaluate those competencies. It includes remediation, it includes a number of different things, but the focus really is going to be on the 303 and the 304, the formative, meaning the going along type of evaluation, and then the summative evaluation, what you're doing at the end. We've really beefed up section 3, and hopefully it aligns pretty well with what we all will be doing. Then you have section 4, standards. That is curriculum. Again, probably the biggest change we have done. We'll talk about the foundational and professional content. We'll focus on a little bit on curriculum and competencies. And we will mention the 5 core competencies. You will see lots of elements of the older standards as far as core competencies. We have revised those and really fleshed those out and made them more encompassing. But at the very bottom, you see in bold what our focus is going to be on what 4.08 is, which is the cohort will be requiring you to develop and implement a curriculum management plan. Again, one of those elements is a curriculum plan. Next. So assessment strategy, those section 3.03 and standard 3.04. The later ones talk about remediation and some outcome metrics. But 303 and 304, very important to talk about those. Assessment must occur throughout the program. It's not just the end. Years back, let's say in the 2015 standards, we had a little issue, what we call it, Sarah, an unintended consequence, where we kind of tied this importance of an evaluation metric there where you had to train all your instructors if they were assigning grades. Sarah knows where I'm going with this. And that person had to have all this training because you can just have someone walk through the door and be able to evaluate. Well, there were a number of programs that then to kind of do a shortcut, if you will, for lack of a better term, reduce the number of individuals that were actually doing the evaluation with grade assignments. It created a number of issues. There were programs that were still using, self-assessment exams prior or an exit exam prior to graduating. Outcome metrics or outcome evaluations are certainly important. You want to know the end, where they are, what they're doing prior to graduation, because you're going to expect that graduate's going to take the exam fairly soon after they graduate. But a lot less was focused on the formative process. And you can't just do a summative without the formative. You really need to get that student early on, find out what they know, find out what they don't know, and what they need to know, and remediate. Remediate early. Don't wait till the end of I've known years ago, some of you may have known, faculty that had one exam at the very end of their entire class. Could be 10 weeks or a semester. Not a good idea. Okay, so there is a focus on formative, again, as well as summative. These uh, evaluations must align with their expected competencies. So we got the program goals, and then the thing that you're going to do next, with the help of many, many people, including your advisory committee, are develop these expected competencies. What you want your graduate to be able to do once they graduate. And it's from those expected competencies that then you have to build your curriculum, your syllabi, and your evaluation tools. Uh, Again, these evaluation tools, exams, labs, simulations, we have that down there, simulations, and clinical evaluations. The cohort's going to have a lot of tools over the next year to help you, guidance documents, sample forms, things like that. We've heard you all, the feedback, and we're going to give it to you in the coming year. So this evaluation and strategy alignment, that supports student progression. Next slide. So what about the curriculum part of it? Well, in our Section 4 standards, it starts out talking about foundational and professional content. And you can see elements of the old standards here, because we did talk about the foundational component, the content that provides the basic knowledge, the base knowledge that you want your graduates to have. Oral written communication, social behavioral sciences, biomedical and natural sciences. Many of those courses traditionally were given as part of degree requirements. Science, basic science courses, we've separated them out. There can be some intermingling of the two. We don't specify, well, this has to be taught before this. And I get these questions all the time. Well, how many credits do we have to offer in this, or what the course name has to be? That's all worked out by every program, and with help from your advisory committee and your faculty. We just identify these major areas, these major themes. You have a foundational content, you have a professional content. Where COARC intervenes, and it's not covered in this presentation, but where COARC intervenes is in the sequencing part. And that's part of where curriculum mapping is going to help. If we see, and I'll give you a rather dramatic example. If we see a program and they're teaching ventilators and all this professional content, and the students haven't even had physics yet, or you're doing blood gases and they haven't even had the foundation of chemistry. Okay, those are things where we will, if we see those, we will provide input. So again, foundational, professional content. The professional content builds on that for clinical application. Both must align with the program goals. The foundation of content is not separate from the program goals. It needs to be integrated. Degree programs may have and will likely have additional areas to cover. Next slide. So there are 5 required core competencies. Again, not some similarities with the old standards. These 5 core competencies are required for all graduates. You'll see in the new standards some interpretive guideline explanations. We'll say for baccalaureate programs, this must have, or this is what you should be doing. For graduate degree programs, this is additional things to consider. But all 5 competencies are required. They must be integrated across the curriculum. There's no specific order, but when things get out of order, what happens? Outcomes. Okay, if students are doing poorly in your program after you've done all this and you start to focus on where that issue is, and it turns out in some cases, because I've had emails come back and I review every single site visit report that comes in, there is identification either by the program and a self-identification, or the site visit team and the referee says, hey, you know what, the students gave you feedback that they were really not too prepared for the vents, and they wanted more this first and the physiology first before they did this. Sequencing, again, is important, but the course does not dictate a specific order. It's not taught in isolation. Any one program, any one course is not taught in isolation. And you'll see an emphasis on collaboration in the upcoming slide. These competencies drive the curriculum design, and the map is your roadmap. Just like in a car, you're not going to just drive aimlessly around and get from point A to point B, although I've been known not to ask for directions. So again, competencies drive curriculum. Next slide. Again, we could probably spend a whole presentation just on the 5 core competencies. So what does 4.08 ask you to do? Well, again, major revision. This is a brand new standard, was never in the previous standards. The programs must have a formal curriculum management plan. Management plan is an overall plan, just like in section 3 when we ask you for an evaluation plan. It's a management plan is this part, okay? The management plan includes a curriculum map. So you have to have a map. There are evaluation processes. There are policies that you have to have in place. And then there's coordination amongst the faculty and input from all your communities of interest, and then a review. Just having it and doing it once and then not reevaluating it is not going to work either. It's an ongoing process. It's not a one-time task. And this is a brand new standard, so the core is going to be very helpful with you. We're not going to sit there and come in on your first, new standards review and beat you up on this. We had a number of standards in the past 15 years that were new, that took a lot of time for programs to acclimate to. And I believe, and Sarah probably agree, that this is going to take some time for all of you to get. But once you do it, and if you're doing it in the right way, the dividends are going to pay off tremendously. Next. So, course effectiveness. Each course has to be evaluated. And again, this is now moving from the standard into the interpretive guideline. I'm just highlighting elements of the interpretive guideline. You don't want me to read the interpretive guideline. All the interpretive guidelines, by the way, and the new standards are a little more lengthy, but again, that's providing you with more information, okay? More guidance. So each course has to be evaluated for its contribution to the program goals. If you want to have a faculty member comes up and I got a great idea for a new class, okay, how does it integrate with the goals? How does it integrate with everything else, with the expected competencies? Use student outcomes, clinical performances, and exam results. That is how you evaluate course effectiveness. Yes, you also are going to have evaluations by the students on the faculty, how well they're teaching, but the importance is you need to have evaluations, measured evaluation instruments to evaluate how effective that course is. You're going to identify gaps and redundancies, as I said before, and you're going to make improvements. That's the summary of the course effectiveness with the interpretive guideline. That's what we mentioned. Next slide. So something new. Again, I gave you the example in the back. I was in the silo. I don't know how many of you had the same experience, but I just felt, yes, I had faculty members and I could go to some people and, as a new faculty member, I could ask them some questions, but you felt kind of on your own a little, but there was really no sitting down and sharing of who's doing what. This is a key change and a key mindset change for you. Okay, you can't all be doing all this and then all expect somehow through a miracle that you're all aligned and that you don't have any gaps or redundancies. So faculty communication is critical. In many ways, it might be you and just one other person. Well, again, the communication is probably going to be easier in some ways because you don't have a bunch of people, but in other ways, it can be more difficult because again, you're going to be busier. You have to find time for communicating, and we don't specify the ways in which you communicate. okay? But you're going to have to sit there and you're going to have to regularly talk about sequencing and integration and consistency and putting the plan together, the map together. It's not a program director thing only. It is all the faculty, anyone that teaches. If you can get adjunct teachers involved with it, all your program faculty need to be involved. And all of that supports a cohesive delivery of the curriculum. Next slide. So we're all about review. CoArc is heavy on review, reevaluation. We've been doing that since the 80s when we came out with those resource assessment surveys. I won't trigger all of you with talking about surveys at this. So again, review and revise. It includes data analysis and feedback, similar to what you are doing with your resource assessment surveys, with your grad employer surveys. We will be revamping the resource assessment surveys. We will be revamping the grad and employer surveys because we have new standards now. So there will be elements that are evidence of compliance specific in our new resource assessment matrix grad surveys and employer surveys. There's things that will help you, but you may want to do your own type of survey. You may want to create something that is specific for you and not a generic resource assessment that covers everything. So data analysis and feedback is big. The curriculum map needs to be updated as needed. Okay? When does that happen? Whenever there's a change in the standards. For example, when does that happen? Right now. Whenever there's a change in the exam content for the NBRC exam for entry into practice, happening very soon. You're constantly making changes. You may have state-specific changes that are occurring. Okay. So review and update. That is a requirement in our standard 4.08. Next. So evaluation and continuous improvement, a little more specific. I already covered many of these things, but you need a formal plan, course effectiveness, faculty participation. You need to have those students evaluations done, graduate employer surveys, and advisory committee feedback. A number of these things will be done because I kind of glanced over at the chat. When are these coming out? Soon. Some within the next month or so, some a little later. We do have to have a review process at CoArc where we have to review these at committee level for a number of things, and we will be doing that. So a bulk of things will be coming out by our July meeting in the summer forum. So we'll be covering those, and then any remaining things in November, and then after that, it will be time for CoArc to do a revision and a review of ourselves for continuous improvement. Deficiencies require action plan implementation, tracking, and reassessment. That is the same for Section 3, for Section 2 resources. It's all the same. It's going to be the same process. Okay. The curriculum map is key to everything. It needs to be measurable and evidence-based, this review process. Okay, next. We're getting there. We're getting to the fun parts there. I don't think I have any secrets. Did I divulge any secrets yet? So evaluation and continuous improvement. You want to analyze the outcomes. Again, you have to identify what those outcomes are. There are some program specific outcomes. We've identified those. Everyone knows those, right? Retention, graduate success on the exam, graduate satisfaction, employer satisfaction. But there are a number of other outcomes that you need to identify that may be course specific and maybe within the course. So we talk about inter-course and then different courses that you have, and then the whole program. So there's lots of elements of that. We do touch on that in section 3. So include stakeholder feedback. Your advisory committee should not be, passive. You cannot be just contacting them once a year and we're all going to get together and what are we having to eat and then that's it. Let's cover these things and be done. Okay? They need to be involved. The stakeholders are not just your advisory committee. They, again, graduates, you may have program individuals within your institution that are their whole job is institutional effectiveness. Yeah, have you been, if those people haven't knocked on your door, they should be soon. So and stakeholder feedback is key. Changes and improvements, your documents, then you're going to make those changes and implement them. We don't expect you to make all these changes all at once. Okay? Because if you do, and then you see something, a result, then it's very hard to figure out, well, what was it that we changed? Okay, what is it that really was the key here and the key change that resulted in the better outcome? So be careful, measurable, and intentional with all the document changes that you make. Next slide. Now the interpretive guideline, some highlights. You have to have a curriculum that is current, logically organized and sequenced, and competency-based. It must promote progression. You have to show progression from that student in the initial parts through the end outcome that you have for them. Minimize redundancy. If two people are teaching one thing, it is okay. If I'm teaching, some things in events and Sarah's teaching some things in events, it is okay. We're not saying eliminate one of them. You may want to reinforce many, many aspects of the curriculum and teach it in different ways. Okay? But is it being redundant? That's what you have to ask yourself. And if it is, remove that. And it must align with the NBRC content matrix. And then you can go to the content matrix now. Next slide. Okay. So alignment with the NBRC exam content, which we have had a tool for many, many years. And we've kind of had it really has been an offset from our standards revision coming out and the NBRC exam content matrix coming out. That is one of the reasons why we delayed the 2027 standards. It used to be the 2025, we called it, and then briefly the 2026 standards, and now it's the 2027 standards. Coming out January 1 is when it goes into effect, which is the same time you have the new exam going into effect. So there's an alignment there. So you want to conduct comparisons with the content outline. You should look at that minimally on an annual basis, but at the very least, it should be when you have a new content matrix that comes out. There's also two parts. There's the content matrix comparison document, which I'll show you a picture of. And then there is the thing that you do every year now. We've integrated into the annual report of current status. It used to never be there, but now it is. You have to review the subscores by content area and look at performance. And from that, you evaluate what changes you need to make in your curriculum and to see if you can make improvements. So there's the evaluating the content matrix itself compared to your curriculum and making edits. And then there's evaluating on an annual basis how well your students are doing on the exam and what areas you can modify. Two different things. Okay. So mapping shows where all of this is taught. If performance is low, you need to implement the action plans and the map should help you. Next slide. Okay, you should all be familiar with this. Okay, if some of you are seeing this for the first time, I feel you. No, you will be familiar with it. We had some changes in here. Obviously, the content matrix is changed on the left, but on the right, we used to have just kind of a course column. It was one column, you listed all your courses. Where are we teaching? Respiratory-driven protocols for oxygen titration or weaning and all that. Some of you may say, when you went through this the first time, it's like, oh my God, we're not doing that. Okay. So listing a course is fine, and you can kind of still do that. We're not asking you to fill out every little spot on this grid. My former program director did this years ago. It was not simulation, I will tell you, but he broke out the course. It wasn't one course program number. He listed our didactic courses, the lab courses we had in the clinicals, and he got a better picture. Not just where are you teaching this, but how are you teaching this? How are the students receiving this information? And that can go a lot longer way into developing a better curriculum, a more integrated curriculum. Okay. So again, when you go back and students now perhaps are not doing well in their ventilator class or whatever, for example, I'm focusing on ventilator. They're not doing well in ventilator class. And then you look at this document, hey, we did a review and it looks here, we were only covering it in didactic and lab. I'm using an extreme example. We weren't covering it on clinical. So, oops, that's a problem. Okay. And the answer, Jackie already answered on the chat. It's already on our forums page. Okay. So, next slide. So, the outline alignment and review conducted annual reviews. Okay. You want to be prepared to show documentation. You want the that's going to be on an annual. That's required now. The subscores, you have to put that information in. We may be doing some modifications, but right now we're keeping that 85% of the national mean. That's what we're looking at. And again, forcing you to do the review on an annual basis. Previous to that, the only time we asked you to do that subscore review was when you had a progress report for low outcomes on your exam. That's a little bit too late in the process, okay? When your outcomes start dropping below a threshold, that horse has left the barn many, many months ago. We are trying to be more formative in our evaluation and help with you. So we're looking at trends now. We are looking at trends for you. We are looking now at programs. You're going to hear us. If you're trending down on your outcomes, especially your exam outcomes, you're going to be hearing from us earlier. We don't want you to get to that point. And one of the things that helps you not get to that point is looking at this information every year. Okay. Next slide. Okay, the evidence compliance, I will go through those quickly, and you'll see those in details, but we're going to ask for your curriculum plan, the overall plan. There are going to be policies that you'll need to have in place for curriculum, the curriculum, and the curriculum map. It will need to be updated. So when you get site visited, we will want to see that is being done, updates, course and program evaluation documentation. So it is a lot of things. Documentation comparison to curriculum, to the content matrix, program level evaluation documentation, documentation comparing the NBRC exam content outline, lots of documentation, the plan itself, meeting minutes and stakeholder input. We want to see evidence that you're talking about this outside your office, okay? That you're not just doing this as a silo. We need to see meeting minutes and stakeholder input. Next slide. And your annual report, that's going to be validated by us. That's going to be the other piece of evidence. Faculty and advisory committee meeting records, you're already doing that, but that's something that you're going to have to focus now in addition for your faculty and IAC meeting records. And evidence of instructional coordination. We'll be talking about that more over the coming months. And then action plans. Did you follow up? Are you following up? Are you making revisions? So as I enter I believe it's the last slide for me, as I ran through this, kind of a summary here. You've got the program goals. Everyone's got them. Program goals. Everyone has the same primary goal. Some of you have different goals. You're going to identify the expected competencies. If you're an existing program that's been around for decades, you're going to have to start this process again. Re-look at your competencies and have the align. Then, instead of develop the curriculum, you will be revising the curriculum. Then you're going to look at the NBRC exam matrix. Look at that content matrix comparison and identify gaps and redundancies. Then you're going to modify the curriculum. Okay? And now you've got a curriculum that is aligned with the program goals, aligned with the NBRC content matrix. And now you're going to do what? You're going to map it all out. Okay? You're going to map it out and you're going to validate alignment through reevaluation and reassessment. Now, the take home, the competencies drive the curriculum. You don't teach to the NBRC exam. The NBRC will definitely be telling you that, and they probably have told you that in the past. They will keep telling you that your program is not designed, it should not be designed to teach to the exam. There is way much more that a respiratory therapist entering practice needs to know than what is on the NBRC exam. So it is a tool. That content matrix comparison document is a tool. Yes, you need to make sure you're covering the things that are being that are part of the exam so that students will have the best chance of success on the exam, but is not the end all and be all. The exam is a reference, not a starting point. At this point, I will now turn it over to Dr. Varakotis.
Thank you, Tom. So, I hopefully you're not completely overwhelmed. I hope by breaking it down kind of by what's in the standards and what's in the guidelines and what's in the compliance, that will kind of help you take a deep breath and realize that actually this is an exercise that will make your program better. That there's no doubt about that. And so I think what Tom mentioned about, we do have some, we understand it's something new. And so we are trying to do what we can to support. So definitely this next portion that we are kind of going to transition into here that is about kind of mapping itself. We want to make sure that we're very clear for people that there are many, many, many ways to organize a curriculum map. And I really, truly would suggest that you start by determining if your college or university has a preferred curriculum map template. There are some members of the co-op commissioner board. There's some members of our external group that was part of the standards revision that said, well, what if my university has one that I have to use? That's fine. COARC does not specify exactly what your curriculum map needs to look like. So Tom had mentioned a few minutes ago that if you have an institutional effectiveness coordinator or something with that kind of a title, ask around and find out if there is a curriculum map template that your college or university has. You can adapt and maybe just build on something that already exists. However, if you are in a position where you do not have a template that exists at your institution, we're going to kind of present to you several different formats that are really just designed to help you get started. These are starting points. These are not fully fleshed out. These do not represent something that you can copy paste for your program. Okay, these are just really, truly starting points. And we're going to kind of present 3 ways of organizing a curriculum map. And the first one will be around your program competencies. Hopefully, if you've learned nothing else so far, your program should be based on required competencies. So we're going to start with that one. And then obviously those competencies will lead to outcomes. So the second one we'll talk about is organizing a curriculum map around program outcomes. And then the third, we are going to touch on a curriculum map that actually gets down to the level of course outcomes. And we'll talk about some good things and bad things about a course outcome curriculum map. And please recognize, again, there's a disclaimer on the slide. We're going to mention this several times. They'll be on the examples that we're going to share with you. COARC does not require a specific document or format for the curriculum map. And we are really just trying to provide some guidance documents that are intended to support compliance with the standards. This is not exhaustive and does not prescribe the only means of demonstrating compliance. You can demonstrate compliance with these standards in other ways, provided they meet the intent and the requirements. So I probably will repeat that several times throughout the presentation. Melissa, while we're getting started, if you don't mind, could you put the link to the MoreRT's website where this is located, so that when I get to the actual examples, people can go there if they want? I would appreciate that.
Yep.
Thank you. All right, so if we start with a kind of a competency-based curriculum map. So what is your list of required competencies? You need to have this. And Tom mentioned if you're a new program, right, you're starting with a blank piece of paper, you've got lots of resources to do that. If you're an existing program, if you don't have a fully fleshed out list of program competencies, this is a good time to revisit, refine, update your required competencies with the new COARC entry into practice standards and the new RT exam. It is always a good time to check in with your advisory committee, right, regarding any competencies that they believe are necessary for a successful graduate. And then this also may be a way to incorporate AI into your faculty role. Some AI tools are able to synthesize existing documents into like summaries and lists. And so might be able to take several different inputs and use those to help facilitate creating a list of competencies. Of course, always with the caveat, you've got to double check everything, right? But that might be something where it could help you in your faculty role. And I just want to remind everybody that competency is an observable, measurable ability that integrates knowledge, skill, and attributes, right? It's all of those things together. So when you look at this list, this is not what's on the detailed content outline of the RT exam, right? It's related, right? There is definitely a relationship between the two, but a competency is really about that observable, measurable knowledge, skill, and attribute. So let's say your list of competency would include things like what's on the screen: clinical assessment, performing clinical assessments, performing airway management, managing lung expansion and clearance, supporting oxygenation and ventilation. If I'm going to skip down a little bit, utilize evidence-based practice, exhibit affective behaviors, participate in interprofessional practice, educate patients and families, right? So, and if you are a graduate or an undergraduate or graduate program, you might have managed respiratory therapy department clinical services, right? I also want to just point out really quick, this is not a comprehensive list of required competencies, right? And they're maybe not even all that well written, but they are illustrative. And that's the point of these. I also do want to acknowledge that some of these are likely only applicable to our entry into practice programs. But there's others that are on here that could be applicable to both entry into practice and degree advancement programs. And just looking through the list of participants, I know there are some that have both types of programs. Some only have an entry into practice, some only have a degree advancement. You can do a curriculum map that is competency-based regardless of the type of program that you're with. So I'm just going to use this list to kind of get us started as building a competency-based curriculum map. I just want to pause for a second. Oh gosh, I don't know if you guys can really see that very well, but I just want to pause a second. This is a resource that's included on the More RT's website, but each competency that we just looked at begins with an action verb. Remember, they are observable and measurable. You have to have an action verb in a competency. So as with most things in life, the words that we choose are important, right? The words we choose matter. So there is information about something that's called Bloom's taxonomy. If you have some background, formal education in education, you probably have heard of this. If not, if you've been around for a while, you probably also have heard of it. It's frequently used in a variety of settings, and it's a way of organizing verbs into kind of different cognitive domains, going from lower order thinking skills to higher order thinking skills. And you guys will remember from Tom's portion of the presentation, there are definitely critical thinking and problem solving is one of the areas, right, that's required. So you're going to have to be very careful about the words that you choose, the verbs that you choose when you're writing your competencies. And again, organized from remembering all the way up to creating. And so there's lots of resources out there. I did try to give you guys the reference for these. I'll be honest with you, a simple Google search will produce a lot of resources on Bloom's taxonomy. I went right to the source. Again, I provided the 2001 reference for you, so you can look that up. But honestly, a Google search will get a lot of it. So you want to incorporate these verbs at the appropriate level into your competencies. So it really indicates explicitly what the student must do in order to demonstrate that they've learned, right? So you want to make sure that you choose very, very carefully as you're writing your list of competencies. Okay, so if I was going to build a curriculum map, I would start with a spreadsheet program, and you can choose to use a spreadsheet program. You can choose to use something else. I'm just going to do the spreadsheet because that's kind of what I'm most familiar with. If you have a different format, there's lots of programs that are out there. Some people love Canva, a lot of different things. It's whatever you want. Again, COARC does not specify what you use. But if I were building a spreadsheet, I would label my first column of my spreadsheet as RT competency. And then this is literally just the list that we had on the previous slide. If you have the ability to do two screens or to do a split screen and you want to click on the link that Melissa put in the chat from the More RT's website, you will go to the spreadsheets, right, that are built that will be for this part of the presentation. So I would label my first competency or my first column as RT competency. And then I would, you can include as many columns as you wish when you're putting together your curriculum map. COARC kind of suggests that maybe you start with these columns, that you consider mapping these content areas and these types of things in your map to help you with meeting the COARC standards. So a few quick definitions of what some of the columns would be. Tom mentioned foundational content, right? So this would be the essential knowledge, concepts, and skills that form the base on which more advanced or discipline-specific learning is built, right? So you would start with what is the foundational content. RT professional content, I think we all have got that down, and we know what courses and classes are. The next column we would recommend is a mastery level, and Tom alluded to this earlier as well. And so this is the degree to which a learner can independently and consistently, those are two important words, right? Independently and consistently demonstrate a skill, a concept, or a competency in reference to an established standard. So we're going to talk a little bit more about those mastery levels here in a minute for how you're going to assess that. And then I would have a column for instructional strategies, and then I would also have a column for assessment strategies. We are going to, let's see if I can make this work. The other thing I will just share with you really quick along with the mastery level is COARC is using introduce, develop, and master in our example. And that is, there's some resources on our website that also use those mastery levels. That's fine. You can use that if you want. But there's another pretty popular way of assessing kind of mastery level that's used in a lot of health professions education. It's called Miller's Pyramid. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that or not. But it's really more about, it breaks it down actually into four kind of categories starts with knows, right? And this is about fact recall, then knows how. So again, can do, interpret a case, then shows, so demonstration and simulation or an OSCE, and then does. And this is where you would have performance in practice with direct observation. If you want to use Miller's Pyramid for your mastery level, that's fine. Again, COARC doesn't specify or require how you indicate mastery for your curriculum map. All right, now this might be the part where you want to actually flip over to the resources page if you're looking at this and going cross-eyed like I am. But this would be what we just talked about with the RT competency as my first column, my foundational content that's necessary for for my student to be successful in demonstrating accomplishment of that competency, the RT professional content that would be needed, a course and class where it would be covered, what mastery level is expected at outcome, what instructional strategies am I going to use, and what assessment strategies am I going to use. Okay, so again, I know this is a lot to look at. If you want to pull up the spreadsheet on your own in a split screen, you are more than welcome to do that. I do have this disclaimer on every page, right? This is just an example, right? If you don't like this, if you don't like one of the columns, if you want to add a bunch of extra columns, you are more than welcome. I do just want to pick out a couple. So this kind of goes across and then is going to come back and go across again, right? So we're going to go left to right and then come back and go left to right. But if I just pick a couple, and I tried to pick some that would be applicable to our entry into practice, but then also maybe our degree advancement. So if I have an RT competency that says administer medications, my foundational content is likely going to be a pharmacology course of some sort. My RT professional content would include something like aerosol delivery techniques, right? Potentially. And I could offer that in a course or a class that in my procedures 2 class, right? I'm probably going to do some other stuff first, right, in my procedures 1, and then I may get to medications, administering medications in a procedures 2 class. At this point, I would say that my mastery level is to introduce, right, an aerosol delivery technique. I'm going to use a skills laboratory as an instructional strategy. And then my assessment strategy, I'm going to use a direct observation tool. That sometimes people call those skills checkoffs, right? Where I have a rubric that I check off about a skill. So I could do that. And again, this is just one very basic example, right? You would definitely have to build this out a lot more. Participating in interprofessional practice. If we go to the second one that's on our example, again, this could be for entry into practice or for even degree advancement potentially. And so foundational content for this would be communication and teamwork. And that may or may not be taught in an RT course. It might be taught in a general education course or a prerequisite course. But in the RT professional content, I'm going to talk about structured interprofessional communication tools. This would be something like the SBAR, right, as an example, where I could talk about that. And this maybe is something that I'm going to focus on in their clinical education courses, especially if you have a seminar, maybe that's associated with a clinical education course. And the level for this is going to be mastery, right? They need to master this in this course. And so it's going to, the instructional strategies would be supervised clinical education, and I'm going to use a clinical evaluation rubric to assess that. And then I just picked out, again, education, patients, and families, because it has wide application for both types of programs. So again, I could have my communication, foundational content, but then I could also maybe have some education theory. If you are associated with a baccalaureate or graduate program, education is one of the additional goals, right? So that would be a foundational content that they would need. And then for the RT professional content, you could talk about essential steps for self-administration of medications. This could be in a patient education course, right? Especially if you are have the time in your curriculum to do that. This could be a develop, because they're probably not going to master it in a course. They probably would have to master that in supervised clinical education. But I could use reflective practice, so role playing, right, or some sort of a standardized patient, right, where they could do that. And I might use an OSCE, right, which would definitely use a standardized patient as the assessment strategy for that. So I hope you stuck with me through kind of how to potentially organize the different columns, right, what that would look like and this is, again, for the program competencies curriculum map, right? So starting with your list of competencies. All right. The next type of example that we have is program outcomes. So you may choose to organize your curriculum map based on those programmatic outcomes that you have. And so these are really the specific knowledge, skills, and professional behaviors that students are expected to demonstrate by the end of a program. This is at graduation, right? This is what they should be able to do at graduates. It describes what graduates should know and do. And it can provide, when you're putting together a curriculum map, a foundation for your curriculum design, the instruction, and the assessment. And so it's not a bad idea if you start with your competencies and feel like you've gotten that down pretty good, maybe you would want to then shift to your learning outcomes and see if you also have some gaps there. And I would also suggest that this organizational approach may be especially useful for the degree advancement programs, since the standards for degree advancement programs do require the development and the assessment of expected student learning outcomes. And so this may be a great way to organize a curriculum map at the outset for the degree advancement programs. So again, we would start with a list of program learning outcomes, and it could be things like apply cardiopulmonary science, perform RT procedures, interpret diagnostic data, manage mechanic ventilation, demonstrate professional behaviors, competency in a specialty area of RT practice. There's a lot of degree advancement programs that have that. Collaborate with an interprofessional team. This is also not a comprehensive list, and it's also not fully developed, right? But it would take a lot more to fully develop all of these. But it can be, we're just going to use this list to illustrate the process of building a curriculum map around some learning outcomes. These also all start with action verbs. Again, carefully choose your words when you're developing your program outcomes, just like you do when you're developing your list of competencies, so that you set yourself up for success for assessment, evaluation, and ongoing curriculum improvement. So choose your words very carefully. So the first column becomes our learning outcomes. And again, just like with the competencies curriculum map, you can choose as many columns, right? You can include as many columns as you want. We kind of suggest that maybe you include some of the same, but some different. So foundational courses, professional courses, learning experiences, what mastery level, again, is really important. And then how you're going to assess mastery for those program learning outcomes would be a strong suggestion from us. So again, if you want to go directly to the spreadsheet, you're welcome to do that. If you want to hang in for a second, we'll look at this on the screen. So you can start filling in each of the columns with your outcomes, from your outcomes. And so we provided some, again, just pretty generic examples. So if you start with, I'm going to go to the next slide. If you start with managed mechanical ventilation, foundational courses would be physics and the gas laws. RT professional courses could be mechanical ventilation 1 and 2. And your learning experiences would include laboratories, simulations, clinical education, right? And obviously, I'm going to be breaking this out into a lot more detail as I go. But I know that I'm going to include, in order for students to be able to manage mechanical ventilation, I would likely need to have learning experiences in all of these areas. And I think Tom mentioned that before, that if you don't have clinical experience in mechanical ventilation, you're unlikely to be successful in programmatic outcomes. And the master level would be the mastery level would be to master. And again, my mastery assessment, what is the assessment that I'm going to use to determine that my students have mastered the ability to manage mechanical ventilation? And I could use a simulation-based assessment. Again, these are not necessarily prescriptive at all, right? Just some things to think about. Demonstrating professional behaviors, I would need communication, healthcare ethics, and I could do that through clinical education courses 1 through 3 would be my professional courses. I would use seminars and reflection as learning experiences. I'm hopefully getting to at least the mastery level of develop for this one by the end of the program. And again, I would be assessing this with clinical evaluation rubrics. And then demonstrating competency in a specialty area of RT practice. I think Tom had mentioned about minimizing redundancy, but sometimes redundancy is important. And so I'm going to pick neonatal pediatrics as an example, right? There's a specialty credential that goes with that. That is a patient population that should be covered in entry into practice programs and those kinds of things. But if you are a degree advancement and you have some sort of expectation that they become competent in a specialty area, you might want to further flesh that out. And so a foundational course that a student would come in with would be mechanical ventilation, right? They would need to have mechanical ventilation potentially before they would move on to a neonatal pediatric respiratory therapy course that would likely also include mechanical ventilation, but would include a whole bunch of other stuff as well, right? And so they need this foundational knowledge to be prepared for the professional coursework in neonatal pediatric respiratory therapy. And again, I would likely need to use some laboratory simulation and clinical education. If I want them to be competent in a specialty area, I have to be at the mastery level. And I'm going to use objective written assessments and maybe simulation-based assessments to determine that they have mastered a specialty area. Okay, so hopefully you guys are still hanging in there. A third option, you're like, oh, finally, she's going to be wrapping up soon. A third option for putting your curriculum map together is much more granular and detailed. And this would be a course outcomes curriculum map. I just, please listen carefully. We do not suggest you start with a course outcomes curriculum map. It can likely get pretty overwhelming and you can kind of start to lose sight of what you're trying to accomplish. So I think you guys are we're very well aware that best practices in education is to begin at the end. We've demonstrated that throughout this process. Tom talked about it. I've talked about it. So begin at the end. Start with your desired program outcomes and then build from there. So this is in contrast to starting with the content that you want to deliver and then hoping you eventually get to the outcome that you want. So we want to make sure that you starting with a course outcome curriculum map may cause you to shift to focusing on content and not on your outcomes, right? Your program outcomes and those competencies. So once you have a competency-based or a program outcomes curriculum map, you could utilize a course outcomes curriculum map to help you really identify where those gaps are that Tom was mentioning that may show up on your NBRC score reports, right? So you could use that to kind of figure out, make sure that your students are really being successful in accomplishing those those expected competencies and outcomes. So the process really is very, very similar to what we've already discussed. Start with developing course level outcomes, right? So identify your desired outcomes. This would likely include these would likely be included in your syllabus as course goals, instructional objectives, expected learning outcomes. Again, we don't have standards on minimum content to kind of be included in that. So this is, you would decide for your course, right? What would the desired outcomes be? Then you're gonna, once that's determined, then you figure out what evidence and assessment format and criteria are you gonna use to see if they've met the outcome. Then you start to think about learning activities and tasks. So again, don't start with the tasks, you start with the outcome. And there's been some questions I think I've seen in the chat about where can I find some of the documents. And so on the COARC's website, if you are from the homepage, if you click on the accreditation tab and then click on forms and reports and then scroll. So there's a ton of information there, but you do kind of have to scroll through. There is a section called curriculum comparison and sequencing. And I do believe that this is the document that Tom showed you an image of, and you can click right on it and you can download it yourself. The other thing is if you keep scrolling past the curriculum comparison and sequencing, there is a section for the degree advancement. And I would highly encourage, even if you're an entry into practice program, take a look at the developing and implementing your ESLOs, expected student learning outcomes document that you can download. Again, while it's kind of targeted, if you will, to our degree advancement programs, the information in the document and the suggested steps that it kind of takes you through will likely help all programs as you kind of develop, especially your program and then your course outcomes curriculum map. So I would really encourage you to spend a few minutes looking at those resources. So as we have been reinforcing throughout, your course outcomes should start with an action verb, right? So while it's highly unlikely that all of these outcomes would be included in one course, you guys are probably looking at this going, she's crazy. We're going to just kind of, again, use these course outcomes in an example. So if I had organized my my spreadsheet, right, so that I had kind of a module or a week, I just went with the week one, right? However you prefer to organize your courses. And then I would describe a course learning outcome for that week. So for my intro to respiratory therapy week, my course learning outcome is that the student can describe major cardiopulmonary structures, right? For week 2, we're moving on to pulmonary physiology and that they can explain normal and abnormal blood gas exchange. Then they can interpret blood gas values. They can apply RT infection control procedures, perform airway clearance techniques, select and apply O2 devices, and set initial ventilator parameters. Again, I know this is unrealistic, but it's to kind of just give you guys an idea of how you would put together this course outcomes map. And then again, thinking about what columns that you would want to include. Again, still the foundational content, your professional content, that mastery level, right? Because that helps determine what your assessment methods are going to be. So learning experiences and then assessment methods. And this is what it would look like if you put it all together. So for my intro, for my course learning outcome, I have described major cardiopulmonary structures. They would need for foundational content, basic cardiopulmonary anatomy and physiology. In the professional content, airway structures and lung volumes could be described. This mastery level would be introduce, and maybe I'm going to use micro learning, right, as my learning experience, and I would have an objective written assessment for that. As you guys can see, as you work down, there are a myriad of learning experiences that can be used. And again, COARC doesn't have any rules or specifications or expectations. It's really about matching. In this case, it's matching. This is the last thing that we choose, right, is the learning experience. We start with the outcome. You think about what do they have to demonstrate, and then you figure out what learning activities you're going to use. So this is the last thing that you would choose. And I just tried to give you some examples, right, of different learning experiences that could be used in a course to try to accomplish that learning outcome. And I believe that is the same thing. Sorry about that. Not sure what happened there. That looked kind of weird. So at this point, again, we've mentioned we started with examples. When we kind of started with the examples, we do not have a specific document or format for the curriculum map. And so we hope this just provided some guidance for you that will kind of support how you figure out to demonstrate compliance with the standard. We do hope that through the curriculum mapping process that you'll help determine what your strengths and your weaknesses are, and then build an improvement plan on that. That's Clark is very much about high quality respiratory therapy education. That's really what we're all about, and we are hoping that this will help us all of our programs to get to that point. So I think we can take some questions at this point if there are any. I don't have the chat pulled up.
Sarah, I've been answering
Oh,
I've been
perfect.
answering a few of those, but there's one at the very end of the chat that I think you could address.
Okay, hold on. I gotta get there. Which one? Help me out here.
Would you suggest using this method if you already have course maps, but not a program map?
Oh, okay. So if you have a course map, you have individual course curriculum maps. Yes, you could definitely use, again, those course outcomes that you have. You could definitely feed those back and say, well, if I put these together, right, that leads to this program outcome, right? Or if I group these 3 or 4 together, that would lead to this program outcome. You could definitely work backwards from there. I would suggest, though, that you also might want to move forward and really say, what are my program outcomes, and see if the ones that you identify as a faculty are the ones that show up in your courses. Does that make sense? Like you don't want to get yourself, when Tom was saying, when I started as an educator, people use the table of contents in whichever respiratory textbook they chose, right? They started with the content. We're really trying to get you to think about what is the expectation at the end, what's the outcome you want. So be careful to use your course map to drive your content. Make sure that you really are thinking from what is your program outcome? What do you want your graduates to be able to do? And then working forward. So you might have to meet in the middle if you have course maps but don't have a program map. Start with what you want them to do and see if you can merge the two in the middle. Does that help? Karen, I believe, asked that question.
Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you so
Okay.
much. I kind
Absolutely.
of accidentally have all these course maps through my master's degree.
Yeah.
But I do think what you said will be helpful
Yeah.
in terms of figuring out what my competencies for the whole program will be, and then finding those in my individual course maps.
Yes. I think that's going to be a valuable exercise, right? And that's something you can demonstrate to your advisory committee, right? You can say, these are what we think our graduates need to be able to do, right? And get some input from them for sure.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Does anyone have any questions? You could type them in or raise your hand if that's possible. Melissa, we have what, 15 minutes left?
Yes, we do.
I think Susan has her hand up.
Yes, thank you. Tom, you mentioned that about the reporting on the sub-scores on our outcomes, that it's going to be more detailed on the upcoming annual reports, if I understood correctly, because we report on it now. Can you explain what's going to be different or more robust with that?
Okay, won't be too different than it is now. Just to clarify, we're still waiting, and I know Rob's on here, Dr. Shaw, we're waiting for some finalized documents, reports on their end for the new exam, and then we can be more specific about what we want on our end. Because right now, everything that you're filling everything out this year, you're filling it out in July, by July 1. you're filling out these sections based on the TMC exam because that's what's in existence. Next July, it's going to be some different wording, but it'll be the same process. There'll be some tweaks, if you will, based on what the reports actually are pulling for data, the names of the reports, things like that.
Okay, thank you.
So, Sarah, there was a comment from Jackie. You're probably familiar with this. Changes that have to happen at course level. In some cases, those
Oh,
have to be approved by
mm-hmm,
higher ups, so that's going to
mm-hmm,
take some time. And that is, you obviously can talk more about it from your experience, but on the co-arc end of things, we're not expecting everyone to be 100% compliant come January 1. There's going to be things that will take some time to
mm-hmm.
do.
Right.
So, and we'll be explaining that I've just got confirmation that the email for the standards will go out tomorrow. So, but there'll be an explanation in there. Read the email carefully. Okay. And again, there'll just be more for us to tell you over the coming months, and we expect there to be a learning curve with these new standards. What you're going to get tomorrow will be the standard itself, the interpretive guideline, the evidence of compliance. But for those that need, I guess the question may be, for those, there's two things you have here. You've got this new exam coming up in January where you've got to do a content matrix comparison, but then you also have major changes, possibly, or significant changes, possibly, to the curriculum to align with the standards. Chicken and egg here? Are we, which do we do first? I'm sure some people are probably asking that.
So, and I would suggest, Jackie, if you do a competency-based or a program outcomes-based curriculum map, that will give you some very clear direction of what, if anything, you need to change in your course outcomes, right? So doing that will help you determine, and then, when we do this, we go semester by semester, right? So as, we implement a change semester by semester and submit those to the curriculum committee. So that, I think that if you spend some time on your program outcomes or your competency-based curriculum map first, and then move to your course outcomes, then you would, hopefully that will focus your effort, and so you won't be changing things that then you find yourself changing again in a few months. So. Looks like Rob had a comment. Dr. Shaw has a comment in there. Oh, yes.
Sarah and Tom, this is Rob. I guess I'll add.
Yeah.
I mean, with that change, that is only applying thresholds to major content domain subscores rather than each of the minor domain subscores, and that means that it's less detailed, and I think it might be worth talking about what I think I understand the rationale. I wasn't there in the room when it was discussed, but when thresholds were applied to minor domains, there were some of those minor domains that would only have a small number of items. And therefore a limited number of opportunities for students to demonstrate what they have mastered. And so if there's, as an example, only 3 items about a minor domain, then, missing one of those, you're suddenly down to a 67% threshold.
Correct.
And if you miss 2 out of 3, now you're down to 33%, and you're well below an 85% level.
Mm-hmm.
And so seem, I think, to make more measurement sense to associate a threshold with major domains where we'll be assured of there being several opportunities for students to demonstrate what they've mastered. I think the other reason I wanted to jump on is we need to remember that with the RT exam, we will be asking this exam to do something that two exams used to do. And so there will be other subscores, other types of subscores, and therefore other thresholds to be concerned about, not just content domains. So there's a patient type list, and so I'm going to assume eventually there'll be some thresholds about patient types. There are on the sim exam, there's information gathering kinds of questions, and then there's decision making kinds of questions. So we're asking this new exam to do that as well. Likewise, on the sim exam, we have questions that are set in a hospital, but then another set of other questions that are set out of the hospital. And so again, those are more opportunities for us to report subscores, more opportunities for COART to potentially assign thresholds.
Yeah, and more opportunities for programs to figure out where the gaps are. You're absolutely correct, Rob. And I think also one of the other things to remember is that a threshold associated with a major domain instead of a minor domain, while statistically it does make sense in those things, but there's still a burden on the program to figure out within that major domain, where are the gaps, right? And so you're still going to have to spend quite a bit of time kind of figuring out where is my need for improvement, right? So that won't change.
And to reiterate, Sarah, because when we use the term thresholds and COARC, it gets people
start to
their neck go up.
Yep.
Those thresholds that we are talking about, Dr. Shaw and Varicogis and myself, those are for self-improvement. Those are for improving your curriculum and aligning the curriculum with the outcomes. That's different than when we talk about, oh, your retention threshold is now, 70%, or your high cut score is this. That's a different type of threshold.
Yep. I think we have about 5 minutes left. So are there other questions?
We left them speechless.
I think so. I think they're fried, overwhelmed. Thank you, Becky. Oh, Brittany has her hand up.
I'll add something. So with us, we had our capstone for our DA program, and I noticed we didn't have prerequisites for it, but with the capstone, you have to have mastered all of the things within your program. So you just have to make sure that if you've mastered things, that you've already taken them prior to mastering, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So we had to change and add, and of course, everyone has their curriculum committees, and so we had to go to the curriculum committee. It's very easy to do, but it's something crossing your T's and dotting your I's.
Correct. Yeah, and it is important to, it's a continuum, right? It's definitely introduce, develop, master if you choose those words, right? So yeah, jumping directly to mastery is a little bit of a challenge. Unrealistic expectation for our students, that's for sure. Lots of thank yous. You guys are very welcome. We are committed. I think Miss Melissa said it at the beginning, and Tom mentioned it. We're committed to making sure that we are providing lots more resources with the changes in the exams and the changes in the standards for all of our programs. So. Does the mapping need to be added on every syllabus? I would say it doesn't necessarily need to be part of the syllabus. This would be, you could use those course outcomes could become objectives in your syllabus, right? Or could be listed in your syllabus, but the curriculum map would not need to be incorporated into the syllabus. That would be something that the program faculty would use as a tool. And if I don't have a question now, but where can I send my questions? Oh, Tom loves to get your emails.
Sarah, your email is so much easier to remember now.
What, easier than yours?
Says the immediate past person.
Exactly.
I don't have to listen to you anymore.
No, no, you
Yes,
do
send it to
not.
me. It's tom@coarc.com.
Yep, tom@coarc.com. Very easy. Let's see. Student learning outcomes on every syllabus. Yes, that's appropriate for sure. See you at Barry. Yep, see you at summer forum. Curriculum plan should be completed by January 2027. Not not necessarily. Do you see Lisa's question?
We'll be phasing it when you will need it for us is, if you're going through a review, a reaccreditation process, or you're going through an accreditation process, you'll need it with the newer versions of the self-study, which anywhere between January and June of next year, if you have a self-study due at some point, you'll get the new version. So you'll be doing it for that. You'll have to do it for that. If you're getting a self-study between now and then, and it's on the old standards, even though it's after January 1, you are to focus on what that self-study is. So the site visit is going to mirror what the self-study is asking for. However, if the site visit team and a referee doesn't already tell you, they're going to say, okay, now you've gone through this site visit review process and a self-study, you really now can focus your energies not on the site visit anymore, but on aligning your curriculum and mapping it out based on the new standards. Okay. It's a duo. Some of you are going to fall in a little maelstrom, gray area where you've got a self-study due, at the end of the year, and you've got, exams and all this other stuff. We'll work with you, but all of the programs, whether you're in a self-study review process, will have to come into compliance with it. The sooner you can map everything out and follow the standards and do a content matrix comparison, the better off your graduates are going to be in trying to get that new exam under their belt.
I would definitely start working on it this summer, right? Because again, with the changes to the exam coming up, you want to make sure that your curriculum is going to prepare the graduates that the second years you have now, and then the incoming students.
Yeah. All right, 2:30.
All right.
Oh, it looks like one more question came in.
Competencies for faculties you also need.
That could be one example.
COARC does not have a standard in the degree advancement standards. There's no standard about, there's nothing that says specific qualifications or certifications, but it does say that you have to have qualified faculty. So, I mean, that's up to you to interpret a little bit. What for your particular program, if it's online and this is a Canvas is what you use, and there's a certification that your college supports, then that would make sense. I hope that makes sense, Anne Ray.
And Sarah, if I can put an Apex plug in there, if you're a full online program, you need to be 75%. You need to have Quality Matters.
Quality Matters, correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
No.
Yep. Always put an Apex plug. That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, we love to support recognition for our programs.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us, everyone. And just as a reminder again, both the slides and this recording will be posted to moreRTs.com under the resources once this meeting wraps up.
Mhm.
All right, have a good day, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.